Welcome to the Little Rock Church of Christ Wednesday evening Bible study. We're beginning a series of lessons this evening dealing with the 7 churches of Asia. We'll continue for the next several weeks each Wednesday evening, looking at the archaeology and the teaching of the first 3 chapters of the book of Revelation. We won't get into the meat of the book or to the different viewpoints, at least not that deeply, but we're going to be looking at the churches, and we'll deal a little bit with the context and what that's about, but I think you'll find that will be a very, very interesting study. The title, 7 Churches of Asia, indicates clearly that this was in Asia, but that doesn't mean the same thing as it does today. What we're talking about is Eastern Turkey, and we see a little bit of that on the map, but with this map you see the little stars there in the darkened section, and that's where the 7 churches were that John was writing to. Now, he chose to write to them because they were involved in the same situation he was involved in, the persecution. He was on the Isle of Patmos, just off the coast of that area. We'll look in a moment to see exactly where that is. But let's get an idea of where this is in the context of today's world. And we'll superimpose a modern map over the top of it. And if we back that up again and you see what's coming, you can see how it relates to Eastern Turkey. Izmir is very close to Smyrna. Almost is Smyrna, but Smyrna kind of overlooks it. But it's in this area of Western Turkey. We have Istanbul up here, Ankara, the capital here. Some of you may be interested in how it relates to the work that we've done in connection with the Ark of Noah. And Ararat is over here in Eastern Turkey, the extreme. You see Ervan, which is the capital of Armenia. From Ervan, you can see Mount Ararat looking across the border. It's right there at that little notch just above Van and below Ervan on the eastern extreme of Turkey. But on the other end, we have the 7 churches of Asia, and that's where we're going to be looking. Now, as we're looking at that, I might mention one other thing. Here are 7 churches. How did it relate to other churches in the New Testament? Of course, across the Aegean Sea, we have Corinth and Athens and Philippi over in this area. But here we've got the 7 churches, and what other church is very close to the 7 churches of Asia, but not included in the 7 churches? There's one about 10 miles away from Laodicea. And I just wonder how many in our audience know which one we're talking about. That's Colossae. Colossae was about 10 miles, about the middle of the word Laodicea that you see there, maybe a little bit below it, would locate the city of Colossae. It's not been excavated. It's a big tell, a mound. Several places on that tell you can see where pillars and various ruins are poking through, and it's just waiting for somebody to come do an excavation, and I'm sure that'll be done eventually. They're working on a number of important excavations now, including Laodicea. That's an ongoing excavation that's been going for a little better than 5 years, and it's just absolutely spectacular. And maybe you've been on a tour and seen the 7 churches, and if you went 5 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot to see at Laodicea. Today, there's more to see there than there is at Ephesus, and more relevant. Much of what you see at Ephesus, which is spectacular and showy, was maybe 100 years after New Testament times. The big library is impressive, but it wasn't there when Paul was there. Anyway, that's where the 7 churches are. And Patmos is an island off the coast And John had been exiled and was on that island. He was partaker in the tribulation, as we read in chapter 1, verse 6. Partaker in tribulation and in the kingdom. That's interesting in view of the fact that many don't think the kingdom was established at that time. In a couple of thousand years, it's still not here. No, he was in it, and they were partaker in it. They were also partaker right in the middle of and partaking of the tribulation, the persecution that was severe against the church and against him. They were dying. Some had been killed, more would be, and John was trying to prepare them for that. But that's the context. Now, in order to understand the persecution and what was happening, we have to talk a little bit about the date. That's rather controversial, and it's not simple. And I know a lot of people for whom I have a lot of respect that have a different view than what I think is the truth. I've listened. I've been impressed with some of the arguments, and I would not deride that position at all. It has some reasonable points. I do not think it's correct. I think there's some stumps in the way. There's some unanswerable problems, and that the other view, that is the late view, fits better. Irenaeus is one of the reasons, not perhaps the main reason, but a reason. He's a very early historian, a devout believer, lived from 120 to 202 AD. And he said, for what was seen, not very long since, but almost in our own day, toward the end of Domitian's reign. He's talking, of course, about the book of Revelation. Almost in our own day, almost an eyewitness. And to relate that to today, if Irenaeus was 50 years old when he was writing this, and that was 2020, then he would be talking about what happened back in 1945. So that's almost in our day. It's within some of us, our lifetime. So he's a very close historian, and he says it was in Domitian's reign, and that would put it about 96 AD. I think that fits, and I think it really, in some places, I mean, the other view fits in a lot of places, but not all. And there are some views, some problems where it won't fit. Now, that's just a very crude summary. Another historian, not quite as close, but generally very reasonable and dependable, Clement of Alexandria, in AD 193, refers to a tyrant, and some would question what tyrant he's talking about, though I think most understand. There are contextual, clear indications. He's talking about the tyrant Domitian. He returned from Ephesus, from the Isle of Patmos. And then what is the tyrant? Eusebius comments on that. He's another historian who writes AD 263, his lifetime, 339, identified the tyrant clearly as Domitian. So we've got a two-step conclusion here. Clement wrote about the tyrant, and that John was there exiled on the Isle of Patmos, and Eusebius identifies that clearly as Domitian. Probably the strongest indication is the fact that the persecution, the tribulation, the impact of the tyrant was not on the saints in Rome or the saints in Jerusalem, but on the saints in Asia Minor. Now, the early date would have Nero be the tyrant from Rome, and he certainly was a tyrant, qualifies in that regard horrible. But his persecution was virtually exclusively in the area immediately around Rome. There is no indication that his persecution extended to Asia Minor. Not so with Domitian, whose persecution was worldwide and was particularly severe, we know, in Asia Minor. Looking at Ephesus, which is where we'll begin, we have this statue. Not a statue of Nero, it's a statue of Domitian. And it is the tyrant with the iron fist, symbol of what we would think as a tyrannical rule. Now, that statue is there. This indicates he clearly had an impact in Asia Minor. I don't think that can be found with Nero. So, I don't want to say a whole lot. We're not exhaustively dealing with it. We're acknowledging that there are significant, reasonable points to the contrary. I don't think they can deal effectively with this point. I think then that we're dealing with 96 AD and a persecution by Domitian against the church. And that's what the book of Revelation is about. That's its setting, though. That's not what we're about in this study. We're looking at the 7 churches to which it was written. We think about Rome in this context and Jerusalem. Domitian was in Rome. He was not in Jerusalem. He didn't have an impact that much in Jerusalem, but certainly did, as his statue indicates. And when we begin to look at that perspective, it doesn't work well when you look at Jerusalem and those circumstances and try to make Nero impact that. I don't think it will. Anyway, that's my take. If you want to hold the other view, we won't have a big falling out. I'll listen and we'll respectfully say, I think there's a view that works better. Anyway, it's my class. I'm going to teach it that way. Let's begin in Revelation chapter 1, verse 1. And we have to deal with a few things before we get directly to the churches. And a very significant point. It is ignored when people look at the book of Revelation today. And how do you just play like the first verse is not there? Most of the people I talk to in the religious world today that talk about the book of Revelation ignore the first verse. He says this is about things which must soon take place. Now, when he starts out, it looks like he would be telling you what this is about. Revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his bondservants the things which must soon take place. Now, my premillennial friends don't believe that. Sometimes they'll do a little tap dance and say, wait, but soon doesn't always mean soon. Well, but maybe it means soon. When we look at the definition of the term here by Martin Gingrich, a brief period of time with a focus of speed, activity and event, speed, quickness, swiftness, haste. It sounds to me like that's what we normally think of when we think of soon. We look at what it says in other verses where that same word is used, which is a good way to understand New Testament words. Maybe you don't trust the lexicographers, but here's the same word used in Acts 10. There's Cornelius, the situation there with Peter. And so I sent for you immediately, and you've been kind enough to come. Cornelius heard that there was somebody that could help him, and so he sent for Peter, what, a month later? No, immediately. Things soon to take place. Acts 12. Behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, a light shown in the cell, and he struck Peter's side and woke him up. Peter was in prison, having been preaching Christ there in Jerusalem. The church is praying for him. An angel appeared. Get up quickly, and his chains fell off. He got up and went to where the church was praying for him. I know what that means. It's the same word. Acts 22. He saw him saying, make haste and get out of Jerusalem, because they will not accept your testimony about me. But he was going to be persecuted. He had to leave now. Well, or soon can, in a few years as opposed to a great long period of time. But the idea that it doesn't mean what we think is just not the case. 1 Timothy chapter 3. I'm writing these things hoping to come to you before long. I don't think he's talking about 2,000 years later. That's what it says in the first verse. It says about things shortly to come to pass. He doesn't go very far till he says it again in verse 3. Blessed is he who reads and hear the words of the prophecy, heed the things written in it, for the time is near. And again, we have people tap dancing and saying, no, it doesn't mean really the time is near. Looking at the term translated time is near, by Thayer, time concerning things imminent, soon to come to pass, is the meaning of that Greek word. Looking at other passages where that same Greek word is used, Matthew 24, now learn the parable of the fig tree, branches already become tender, puts forth its leaves, you know, the summer is 2,000 years away. No, it's near. We know what that means. Chapter 26, he said, go into the city, to a certain man. The teacher says, my time is near. I'm to keep the Passover at your house with my disciples. John 2, the Passover of the Jews was near. Same word. Went up to Jerusalem. John 7, now the feast of the Jews, feast of the booths was near. Okay. Verse 1, verse 3. It's about things not 2,000 years away. It's about things that related directly to the churches of Asia. Now, just think about the rest of the letters that you have in the New Testament. Paul wrote to the church at Corinth about things way off in the future that didn't relate directly to them, or about things that were about what they were in the middle of. He wrote to the church at Colossae about the things that they were concerned with. He wrote to various churches about their problems. He wrote to the 7 churches of Asia about their problems. Now, it was in the midst of a severe persecution. It was a time when they were being killed because of their affiliation with Christ. And so advertising that they're Christians to the world is not always a wise thing to do. They were still trying to do Christianity and teach people, but not so much out in the open. They had to go undercover and using symbols of the Old Testament that those who are students of the Bible would understand would be one way to communicate, which is, I think, what was being done. For example, we go on down to verse 7, and this causes a problem with some who try to think, oh, wait a minute, it couldn't be things that are near. Said it was in verse 1, said it was in verse 3, but he's coming with the clouds. He's talking about the final judgment. Well, that's what a lot of people think. I think that's a problem. He just told you it wasn't about the final judgment. This is a figure that we find used throughout the Bible to refer to judgment, but certainly not always the final judgment. For example, in Isaiah 19, Isaiah says, the oracle concerning Egypt. Behold, he is riding on a swift cloud, he is about to come to Egypt. Well, obviously the end of the world. This is figurative language describing judgment on Egypt by the nations of that time. The idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence. The heart of the Egyptians will melt within them. So I will incite Egyptians against Egyptians. They will fight against his brother, each one against his neighbor, city against city, kingdom against kingdom. This is what was going to happen to Egypt, and that is exactly what happened to Egypt. Of course, it goes on to say they will, because he wouldn't make a full end, he would not utterly destroy Egypt, unlike Babylon, Assyria, others that would be totally destroyed. Israel, they, like Egypt, would not be totally destroyed. Egypt would be a base nation. That's another lesson of the other prophecies that show the fate of nations so accurately. But here is the way Isaiah said this. You're going to have judgment come upon you. And here's the Lord coming, riding on a swift cloud. That does not mean final judgment. That means judgment. Now, you find those figures regarding the ultimate final judgment, but you find it numerous times, and those who would be familiar with this, when they heard this referencing the final judgment, they would understand here's a judgment like God's coming on Egypt, but in that instance of final. We'll look at some of that. So, he's coming with a cloud. He's coming like he did on Egypt, judging the Roman Empire, which was persecuting the church. Had John out there on the Isle of Patmos. Some there in the 7 churches had been killed. More would be killed. He wants you to know he's coming to judge as he did with Egypt. And it's about things not way off in the future. It's about things shortly to come to pass. Again, we go to the end of Revelation. Started chapter 1, verse 1, verse 3. Then it's like the Holy Spirit knew people are going to really get the content this wrong. And so he said, it's about things shortly to come to pass. Gets to the end after all of the figures, and just so you don't forget what I said it was about to start with, I'm going to tell you again the end of it. These words are faithful and true. The Spirit of the prophets, his angel sent to show his bondservants things 2,000 years in the future. Things which must soon take place. That's verse 6. He continues in verse 7. Behold, I'm coming quickly, coming with the clouds like he came on Egypt in judgment. He will not allow this horrible judgment against his people to continue. It will happen. I think he's talking about the persecuting element of the Roman Empire, which was eradicated. It may have lasted another 70 years, probably not quite that long. Not the Roman Empire per se, but this persecuting force that was imposing itself on the church. That's verse 6. He's not through. Again in verse 12, behold, I'm coming quickly. The Lord is with me. Verse 20, again, he who testifies to these things says, yes, I'm coming quickly. Amen. Come, Lord Jesus. So, beginning, ending, don't mistake. Over and over in the beginning. Over and over and over at the end. It's about things shortly to come back. How else do you make that clear? Back to verse 1 of chapter 1. It's about things shortly to come to pass. And he sent and communicated it by his angel to his bondservant John. Now, the word communicated here is an interesting term and not that easy to translate. In fact, we look at Coleman's translation. He said he sent and signified it. He communicated the message. He signified the message. The word, according to Thayer, means basically sign, and says to give a sign, to signify. And so he communicated it by signs. He signified, to show by sign, another Greek reference says. So, according to the tradition, the practice of that day, which used apocryphal literature, a fancy word, which means literature full of symbols and signs, that was not unusual in that day. When you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls and some of the extra literature in addition to the inspired books, hundreds of volumes there, and a large percentage, maybe 30% of them, involve apocryphal books. That's part of their library at that time. So he is showing by signs. And so we look in the book and we see all kinds of signs. And you see Jesus referred to as a lamb that had been slain. You see him referred to as a lion. Now, a lion, a lamb, that's not the same thing. It's certainly one that's been slain. So we're looking at symbolic language. Sometimes people will say, well, the people in Eastern mindset, we're more prone to that. I'm not so sure that's the case. We do a lot of that. It's so common we don't even really think about it. And when we read Jesus speaking of Herod, go tell that fox, we don't even think twice. We know exactly what he's doing. That's not out of character with our mindset. We know figurative language. But I've heard people say, well, I'm going to take the book of Revelation literally. That's not the way it was written. He was showing by signs, signifying. And when you've got a dragon standing on the earth that with his tail knocks down a third of the stars, thousands of light years away, now if that's a literal picture, boy, that's some kind of tail, isn't it? I want you to explain that to me. I don't think that is a figurative picture, and he is communicating, signifying this message with symbols, basically so he doesn't get the Christians in trouble when he's telling them the Roman Empire is going to fall. I'm going to judge it. But that's not a message you advertise in the midst of the power of Domitian of the Roman Empire. He begins by telling them what he saw in his vision. And the vision itself is obvious to me that it's symbolic. Here's Christ with eyes of flaming fire, feet like burnished brass for stamping in judgment. Standing there with stars in his hands. How many of you have ever held stars in your hand? Glitter, but a star, that's just nuts to think that you might. But this creature, this vision, was holding this, and the stars represented the churches. And at the same time, the candlesticks represented the churches. Now, wait a minute, I thought it was, well, yeah, that's the way symbols work. You sometimes have it, several, in this instance, figurative representations all at once. Christ is there. And of course, the point, and as is the case with the parables usually, that there's one central point. As we try to make each little point of the star mean something that we're really laboring beyond what was intended. It was a picture to convey basically a unified idea. Here's Christ in the middle of the churches. He's there. And that's why you see him saying, beginning each letter, I know. And it may be your patience and your toil. It may be your unfaithfulness, your sin. but in all of the 7 churches, only 2 were really doing all they should be doing. But every letter begins, I know. Sometimes, especially when they're trembling, fearful, last week, brother so-and-so was beheaded because of his cause, because of Christ. And then they put his mother in jail, and they're probably going to kill her. And what are they going to relate about us? They're coming after me tomorrow, maybe? Where's the Lord? He's gone. They killed him. Yeah, they say he was raised, but under those circumstances, doubt creeps in, and you wonder, and you're fearful. You need to know that the Lord knows. He sees everything that's happening, and yes, it may be difficult. It may be fearful, and especially these people who were in terrible circumstances needed to understand. The Lord hadn't deserted them. Yes, he ascended to heaven. He's seated at the right hand of God with power and authority and watching every thought, every motive, watching every dire circumstances, every threat, every evil deed. He sees and he knows. And we need to know that he knows. Every letter. I know. And that's the message. Right there. He's not way off somewhere that we can't imagine. He's right here. Right in the middle. In the midst of these churches which are gathered together right there in eastern Turkey. And trembling and fearful over what is going on. He's there. I heard behind me, John says, a loud voice, like the voice of a trumpet, saying, write in a book what you see and send it to the 7 churches. John was right there on the island. Maybe on a clear day he can see the coast. It's a rocky coast. It's not a real nice place. It was a place for prisoners. And he's sitting there and he hears a voice like a trumpet. I've heard a few voices like trumpets. A little envious sometimes of the trumpet sounding voice that some have as they sing praises to God. Will send chills up and down your spine. This is the kind of voice that John heard. It's not something I'll think about it. Now, this is something you listen to pay close attention to. See what the Spirit says to the churches. It tells us that he was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day when this happened. In the Spirit on the Lord's Day when the trumpet voice sounded and told him, you write down what I'm going to tell you and send it to these churches. What does it mean in the Spirit? Well, I've heard every kind of idea you can imagine. I think we get a clue from the way this expression is used in the Old Testament. Ezekiel used that expression several times to refer to the visions that he was in. Ezekiel 3, for example, go to the exiles, to the sons of your people, speak to them, tell them whether they listen or not. Thus says the Lord God. Then the Spirit lifted me up. Go to the exiles. Now, did he literally get lifted up and carried to a different spot? It sounds like it. In the Spirit, at least, he went, and I think he was able to see the situation in the captivity. Verse 14, so the Spirit lifted me up and took me away. I was embittered in the rage of my spirit, and I heard the Lord, the hand of the Lord was strong on me. The children of Israel were in captivity. Ezekiel was to go talk to them. They weren't doing all the things they should have done. And so he got lifted up and carried, at least in the spirit. He had a vision, and he was allowed to see where the Spirit took him. Again, in Ezekiel 8, he stretched out the form of the hand, caught me by the back of my head, and the Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven and brought me in the visions of the Lord to Jerusalem. He's there in Babylon. Some of them are already back there in Jerusalem, and they're supposed to be building God's house, and they're building their own. And he's infuriated. And when he got there, the Lord made him sit there and shut up. You sit there and watch. Don't say a word. And he had to close his mouth and sit for 7 days. And sometimes preachers need to shut up and listen and watch and absorb, because he was ready to let him have it, and he needed to understand. And sometimes you want to do that when you shut up. Chapter 11, the Spirit lifted me up and brought me in a vision by the Spirit of the Lord to the exiles in Chaldea. Verse 37, the hand of the Lord was on me. He brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord, set me down in the middle of the valley. It's full of bones. And here we have the valley of dry bones. And here is Israel in their terrible plight. And maybe we know where this is, maybe we don't. It was one that was pointed out to me when we were there. I can certainly see the picture, and it would fit. But in the vision, the dry bones came together, and the sinews and everything were connected together. It was a picture of the restoration of Israel, a vision. But in the Spirit, he was transported to the spot, and he saw that happen in the Spirit. Verse 5, the Spirit lifted me up and brought me to the inner court. Behold, the glory of the Lord filled the house. So, various times throughout the book of Ezekiel, you find the Spirit lifting him up and transporting him to a place where he saw things going on. Physical body back where it started. Maybe his spirit over here. Got some questions about that I want to answer when we get home. That is in heaven. But very interesting ideas. That's the kind of thing I think is involved. When he heard this voice behind him, he was in the Spirit. He was lifted up, and God was speaking to him in a vision. At least that's the way it was used in Ezekiel. The trumpet sound relates again to Ezekiel, verse 12 of chapter 3. The Spirit lifted me up. I heard a great rumbling sound. Blessed be the glory of the Lord in this place. You're out by yourself, you hear a great rumbling sound, and a voice speaks. You pay attention to that. Again, in the next verse, a great rumbling sound. Here, similar to that, like the sound of the trumpet, would just arrest your attention and send chills up down your spine. Yes, sir. Whatever you say, sir. I'm ready. So, we have the picture of Christ in the midst of the churches. There is Ephesus and Smyrna. That's near Islam today. Ephesus is Ephes, but it is a modern city. And Pergamum, likewise, is still there today. Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea, which is the one that is in the process of revealing just spectacular ruins. These were the seven churches right there on the edge of Asia Minor that we see here. And we want to begin looking at Ephesus, which is not too far from the Isle of Patmos, but right there on the coast. This is a picture I took in modern Ephes. They maybe just got tired of saying fuss on the end, but that's the way it's pronounced today. Very interesting museum there, and now with the introduction you've had, you'll be able to read Turkish here. Ephes, and the second word there looks kind of like museum, doesn't it? It probably doesn't sound like it, but it looks like it. But that's the museum there at Ephesus, and the first thing you see when you go in is just really impressive. Boom, there's Domitian. Not Nero. Well, we made that point before. But this is the museum full of artifacts from the period of the Bible. You go out to the area where most of the ruins are, where the theater is, the library, some of the very impressive ruins have been excavated from the ancient city of Ephesus. You have a parking lot where the buses park, and this is where they have tourist traps. Tourist areas have tourist traps. Isn't that amazing? And they're, of course, trying to attract the English tourist, and they try to translate into English, but sometimes it doesn't quite come across. You want a genuine fake watch? Okay, I've got one for you. And of course, they're talking about the knockoffs, and some of them are pretty good deals on the knockoffs. Anyway, that's interesting. In the gift shops, I found some very interesting things. These are mostly the idols of Diana. Ephesus is where you have this huge, almost incomprehensibly today, huge temple of Diana. Big pillars all the way around 60 feet tall. And Diana of the Ephesians, remember in Acts 19, they thought Paul and his companions, Gaius, Aristarchus, were threatening their commerce. They made their living, some of them, selling idols, silver idols, gold idols, of Diana. And these are images. These are ceramic images. And they would bow down and worship the image of Diana there at Ephesus. This is what they did there. And Paul was there to tell them that's not what they ought to be doing, and they considered that a threat, and you can certainly understand that. And look what's right smack dab in the middle of the images of Diana that Christians consider themselves Christians from all over the world are coming as tourists. And okay, you can pick up this idol of Mary, Donna, or the image of Diana, and they're just side by side. I think one's just as wrong as the other. And they're right there piled together. Here, the picture of Mary with the image of Diana in the background, and the rest of the images of the buildings there at Ephesus. I just found that striking. Wow, look at, don't you understand? Idolatry. Paul was trying to tell them, this is not right. And they still haven't learned it. We still see it happening today. Bowing before the image. Diana the Great of the Ephesians looked like this. Now that's an actual image. That's not a reproduction. That's what they were bowing down and worshiping. And they have all sorts of coins from that period that had this image on them. And no doubt they had images in their homes, as many of them do today, though it's mainly souvenir. The Temple of Diana, don't get it from that picture, try to imagine each of those pillars not 20 feet tall, but 60 feet tall. In the museum in Istanbul, they have one of those pillars, and here's the top and here's the bottom. The 60 feet in between is missing. It's an attempt, of course, the whole thing wouldn't fit in the museum. They just that part of it. But you don't really get pictures to scale. Now, in this picture, look at the bottom of the little pillars down here. You see the little people, little bitty people, with the great big. Now, this thing is huge. Now, this is the spot where it stood, and they have stacked up one of the pillars, and that's not quite as tall as it was, but it's pretty close. But how tall is that? Well, you see the little fellow, maybe you can see him right down there at the bottom. That's me, standing at the bottom of that column. Sent the mind taking the picture and had to get a pretty good ways off to get the spot where that temple was. It's often underwater there. And at this point, with this obviously reconstructed, stacked up column that may last through the next earthquake, and I probably won't, doesn't look so impressive, does it? But it certainly did at the time, Paul. We look at buildings today, go out to Salt Lake City and see the, wow, look at that temple. That's awesome. You go to the cathedral downtown D.C. Wow, look at that building. We're reminded of the attitude of the apostles, Matthew 24, when they referred to the buildings of the temple that Herod had built. And according to Josephus, we have a really good idea. It was truly awesome. And Jesus was really put off with their attitude. Master, look at these great buildings. And of course, lending credence to the scribes and the Pharisees and the hypocrisy and the distortion of the religion of that day. Look at see, it has to be impressive. Jesus said there's not going to be one stone left on another. It's not going to come down. I'm thinking some other stories, but I'll just leave it at that. You get the point. Especially when you look at the pitiful picture today in comparison to what must have been the grand and glorious picture in the time of Paul. Intimidating, encouraging to those who are saying, yes, Diana is great. Great is Diana of the Ephesians. Don't you say anything against Diana. Look at her temple. You see the same point being made today. Same foolishness. You need to hear the echo of Jesus. Not one stone left on another that will not be thrown down. Well, we see the ruins of some of the grand buildings there at Ephesus. This was the library. That's pretty impressive. And you're going against the establishment, and that's a powerful establishment. Now, this building wasn't there at the time that Paul was there in Acts 19. This is probably 2nd century. But this is the street that they walked down. There were shops and other buildings of worship and things sacrificed to the gods for sale along this street, and selling other artifacts or various things as we would in the mall today. But this would help us visualize what Paul saw. He wasn't seeing this dilapidated mess. This was a glorious, gorgeous, impressive, awe-inspiring city that he was opposed. With this picture, we see some of the shops that still remain. You go through those arches and you buy this and that. This is an image of one of the idols of the time. And somebody who's a real scholar of Ephesus might understand what idol is it, what God is represented here. Nike. Sorry about that. Couldn't resist that temptation. But the sun has gone down, and it looks very different today. And one of the things we need to think when we look at the ruins is, yes, that grandeur is in ruins. And the grandeur that may impress you today with religious false doctrine is going to come down, and the sun has set. This is the theater that we read about in Acts chapter 19, and you see that main street that was just depicted. It did end at the ocean. It's almost a mile away from the ocean at this point. Sea level has changed. But looking back at that theater, you can see the ruins, the debris that used to be beautiful, glorious buildings. And this is a very impressive theater. Probably 40 to 50,000 people accommodated, like stadiums today. And what was going on here? The companions of Paul had been drugged down that street. And now they're before the people who are up in arms, shouting. They're ready. We know a little bit about people who get up in arms and they're shouting and they're out on. These were pretty much in control, not like some of the demonstrations that we see today. But they were shouting as the crowd shout today who are, here are people who are destroying our income, our city, our Diana. They're speaking out against, they're not respecting us. Diana matters would be similar to the cry. Great is Diana of the Ephesians, and they're shouting. Here's the companions intimidated by the shouts. For the space of 2 hours, great is Diana of the Ephesians. Well, it's not so impressive today, but we put ourselves back in that circumstance, and it relates to a lot of what we're seeing today. They did not prevail. Sometimes you can have the opportunity to stand before a great audience and they listen. Sometimes they don't listen. They're just not anything you can do. I felt that as I stood there in that spot and imagined trying to address people crying out, Diana of the Ephesians. We'll move on in our next study looking at what this trumpet voice said to John that he was to tell Ephesus. Ephesus was a very impressive church, but it had left its first love. And as we see churches today, I think we see some very uncomfortable similarities. But we hope you'll tune in with us. Be with us throughout the study as we look at the letter, inspired letter of Jesus Christ to the 7 churches of Asia. Let's conclude this evening with a word of prayer. Our Holy Father, we're so thankful that you love us and bless us, that you have revealed your will to us, and that we have access to this amazing letter from Jesus Christ, from our Lord, and can gain wisdom from the Creator of the universe. that can give us instruction and insight so that we may know and know that we know what's pleasing to you. It's thrilling to us to know that Jesus knows, that he sees and understands. Thank you, Father, for all the wonderful blessings that you've given us. In Christ's name.